Hello and good evening to this evening's meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. It's Wednesday, the 20th of October. This meeting will be webcast for those who want to watch it after the event. It will be on the Council's website. We don't have any apologies. No, we certainly don't have any apologies because Councillor Mason has just arrived with lots of glasses of water, which I suspect we'll all need. Agenda item 1, which is, as always, the declarations of interest. Are there any that are that haven't been already disclosed? No, fantastic, thank you very much. Item 2 is the minutes. Are there any comments on the minutes? There are a few typos on there, which I will discuss with the democracy officer and give him my copy for him to correct, so that we have a correct set of minutes. No, excellent. Oh, we are making good time. So our third agenda item is our public participation, and as you know, this committee very much welcomes members of the public speaking. We have 3 registered speakers this evening. The first is Alderman Brian Watson. Hello, Brian, and welcome. And I think this is your first time, certainly whilst I've been chair of this committee. And you wish to speak to us on item 6, which is appointments and rules of the Civic Party.
That's right, yeah. It's basically about the sheriff. And I want to put a bit of light on the position of the sheriff, etc., and its importance to the city. The position is granted by the monarch, and when York amended its boundaries and authorities, a new royal charter was reconferred the same right upon the city. There's only 2 sheriffs in Yorkshire. One is York and Hull is the other. In England and Wales, there are only 16. So that shows the importance of this position. The sheriff is an integral part of the Civic Party, and the York one is the highest sheriff in England and Wales. The sheriff may on occasion deputise for the Lord Mayor. Such occasions where there are 2 functions, where it is deemed necessary for a civic attendance, the sheriff would attend rather than the Deputy Lord Mayor. When Councillor Loker became Lord Mayor in 2019, due to the fact that her nominated sheriff was on holiday, she had an interim sheriff until her nominee returned from holiday. And it is minuted that he was to serve from the 22nd of May to the 25th of July. On the 11th of March 2020, there was a meeting of A&G where it was proposed that the Lord Mayor must have 4 years service on council instead of 5 and must be re-elected. This was because there was no one on the Conservative Party who had 5 years service. It further stated that the outgoing Lord Mayor would become the Deputy Lord Mayor as normal. But it also asked if we wanted to carry on this way, a point that never appears to have been addressed. It also confirms that the role of the Deputy Lord Mayor is to support the Lord Mayor and to attend civics functions when the Lord Mayor or the paper stuck together.
Don't worry.
Just give me half a minute. Or the sheriff are unable to attend, which highlights the fact that there is no need for a deputy sheriff, as it is the Deputy Lord Mayor's remit. I believe that the cause of some of this confusion has come about because on Lord Mayor's Day, the sheriff appoints an under-sheriff. This is always a solicitor, who traditionally is there to sign writs that were associated with the sheriff. I think the word under has been confused with the word deputy. An easy mistake for someone without full knowledge of Lord Mayor's procedure to do. Let me stress, the past sheriffs are not being mischievous in any way, but are only seeking to preserve the traditions of the office of sheriff within the Civic Party.
Could you start to wind up, Brian?
I'm sure you now understand why this has arisen. That
was
is,
it.
yes. But that wind up all right.
Perfect. Thank you very, very much. As you know, we are covering that topic in our discussions this evening. And certainly I would be more than happy to speak with you about this again, as I'm sure the monitoring officer would too.
Okay, could I just take the liberty of asking another question? Because I referred to the nomination of Lord Mayor having 4 years service, if you remember. But on the meeting of the 20th of October, and it approved the minutes of the 11th of March from the Audit and Governance. But on the 15th of July, which I would assume went through as well, on Article 5 on the minutes of the 11th of March, the role and function of the Lord Mayor, it says delete 4 year from the second sentence. Did that get approved that way? And I couldn't work it out actually in the paper.
Yeah, apparently it did.
It did?
Yes.
Oh, that's a hope then.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I best declare an interest, Chair, as the
As
Sheriff
you are the Sheriff
of York.
Yes.
And it's great to hear someone who's as passionate about it as me. Thank you.
Yes. Sorry, I'm not sure. Were you here when I asked for the declarations?
I probably
No,
was,
you
but I
weren't.
didn't realise what we were going to talk about. So.
No, that's fine. Our second speaker is Andy Mendes, who wishes to speak on issues relating to the remit of this committee.
Hi, Michael. Before my clock starts, just to apologise, I don't plan to stay for the Constitution debate. I hadn't anticipated, it wasn't on the agenda tonight. I haven't read the Constitution, so I'll go and listen to you at home, and I'm sure it will be wonderful.
It's only 800 pages, Brian, Andy.
Well, yeah.
Bedtime reading for you. Right,
Yeah.
3 minutes whenever you like.
Okay. So tonight I'd like to ask a few questions about the internal audit reports. First, can I say that it appears that CYC, and especially Debbie's team, have implemented and managed a large range of emergency actions over the last 18 months, and based on the reports provided today, have delivered a great deal of good work. 3 specific questions for Max or whomsoever, I guess it's Max, might be Debbie. First, on council tax and NNDRs, the key findings of the report imply that the reconciliation with the valuation office system is now working. But the detailed entry later in that same report suggests, I quote, that data corruption issues remained outstanding at the time of the audit. Which is it? And either way, what are the implications of that comment, please? On cybersecurity and IT management, first, as a non-accountant, I note that 1 + 2 + 5 = 9 in the new audit world. Do we really only have 9 or possibly 8 schools under LEA control now? Or were these the only ones to return the questionnaire? If it is the latter, does the lack of response from others invalidate the findings of this audit? There are several P3 findings here which, given the well-known and increasing risks around cybersecurity, do seem to me to represent quite a relaxed assessment. I'd be interested in Max's comments on the rationale for that. And a question I've asked before, several times, I think, have the findings been sent to chairs of governors of these schools? And if so, do we record their responses? Final detailed comment on project management. We spent a lot of time when I was on A&G looking at the then new Virto system and all about projects. While this audit is generally supportive, I do wonder whether there's a danger of project managers now just paying lip service to the procedures. When introduced, gateways were real checkpoints where sponsors had to make proper informed decisions about the future viability of the project. And that's right, that's how project management is supposed to work. Now it reads, if you're being cynical, that there are just a few boxes to tick. Again, is this true? And I'd be interested in comments. Just a couple of closing remarks. There've clearly been large amounts of money provided and recovered by CYC through novel, untested procedures. That's inevitable. I'd be interested in Max and Debbie's view as to whether there have been any indications of fraud or attempted fraud by those directly involved over this period? Hopefully not, but I'd be interested to know. And secondly, are they aware of instances of fraud elsewhere or any indications of control weaknesses discovered in other councils that we might learn from? Last point, I was disturbed to read Max's overall report, which described how changes to priorities and audit work are now, it seems, being determined by Verito in conjunction with officers. With audit and governance, I quote, helped to understand which audits are being undertaken. I remember, a long time
Can we
ago,
start to wind up now?
I remember when A&G were led to believe that we had some control over the work programme. Is this involvement now lost forever? Or will audit work planning return to A&G oversight once we're again in what you might call precedented times? I'm sure you'll discuss them fully when it comes to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And certainly, I think some of the points will be raised this evening. And finally, and always welcome, Gwen Swinburne.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for accepting my 45-minute late registration as well. Sorry about that.
It's my pleasure.
Members, well-run, transparent councils have now concluded their preliminary consultations on their 22-23 budget. This ahead of their full consultations and scrutiny on their draft budgets. So I was inspired to review the plans for the City of York draft budget consultation process this year. I scoured all the forward plans, audit and governance, executive scrutiny, our website, even the calendars moving forward. I found not one word, Chair. Once again, there will be no consultation on the draft budget. An unlawful business ratepayer consultation, if any, may take place. We have massively important items on revenue budgets and cuts, capital spending, huge rises in fees and charges, as the last items, no doubt, of the usual extraordinarily long executive committee on the 7th of February. Of course, no mention of this can be found in any forward plan. It will then be decided 10 days later on the 17th of February at Budget Council, where lots of hopeless efforts will be made by the opposition to put forward futile other budgets. Are we okay?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It will then be decided 10 days later on the 17th of February at Budget Council, where lots of hopeless efforts will be made by the opposition to put forward futile other budgets, whilst offering little, if any, scrutiny to the administration's proposals. In other words, almost zero scrutiny by design. This has to stop. I raise this here, Chair, as for 10 years now, I have been raising the lack of consultation of our budget in Executive and Council, ignored by every statutory officer and every administration. Scrutiny has never engaged, as of course it should. The executive member talking shop inserted by the current administration merely adds salt to the wound. So, Chair, my proposal as a way forward is for this committee to be far more engaged in governance matters related to the budget preparation, democratic governance, and consultations more generally. This will need addressing through the revised constitution, as governance, including democratic governance protocols, are insufficiently articulated with clear consequences. Sadly, instead of consulting and addressing strategic constitution issues first, the monitoring officer took it upon herself to deliver you her 800 pages, but the strategic conversations have never happened and no consultation. There can be no halfway house consultation here, Chair. Whatever your behind the scenes group comes up with for committees, that must be the basis of a public consultation and scrutiny in December and January. This is the Council's defining document. We citizens must be consulted. After years of waiting, a delay until March is nothing, and respect for citizens should be everything. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I wasn't trying to be rude. I was just explaining why I was tilting my head, because I couldn't actually hear you properly. I don't know what you do here. I don't think there's anything you can do about the audio. Yeah, I don't think there's anything you can do about the audio. Thank you. And yes, and we will certainly cover a number of the points that you've raised, including the consultation, the public participation in the Constitution, which of course, as I've said previously at these public meetings, I do very much welcome, and I do very much hope that members of the public would like to contribute. And I do apologise that there was no link to the Constitution that was supplied with the report for the papers this afternoon. So, agenda item 4 is progress against the action plan, and I believe that is our esteemed monitoring officer. If you would just like to introduce yourself before you present this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Janie Berry. I'm the Director of Governance and the Council's Monitoring Officer. This is a very brief update in respect of the progress against the action plan, in that since this committee last met, the LGA have been advised of the committee's acceptance of the scoping document, and they've indicated that they are intending to return to December's meeting of this committee, if that's acceptable to you. And that will be their initial sort of engagement or feedback, with the view that, like you expressed on the last occasion, that there will be feedback in approximately 12 months thereafter based on a December programme. The exit strategies document was presented to Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee earlier this week, and also the other key component for delivery against the action plan is discussion on the Constitution, which is a separate agenda item. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions, just conscious of time.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Colleagues, are there any questions? Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. I haven't had a chance to catch up on the webcast yet, but was the exit strategies guidance accepted at Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee?
I understand that the Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee asked for a couple of more amendments, which are currently being undertaken by HR.
Well, in the supplementary then, does that mean it has to come back to us for approval before it goes back to Staffing Matters?
I just need to check on that. I was presuming not, but I'm happy to bring it. There wasn't a specific recommendation that it comes back to yourselves. I can share it with the chair and vice chair, or by circulation by the committee members if you wish.
Well, it was purely on the grounds, sorry, Councillor Fisher, I will come to you in a sec. It was purely on the grounds that it went through with our approval for their consideration in the form in which it went. If it's now going to be an amended form, we do need to have a look at it. And I'm personally happy with the chair and vice chair. Councillor Fisher.
I think it's absolutely critical it comes back through this committee. At the end of the day, it should be our final decision as a governance matter. So yes, I think if the rest of the committee is happy with chair and vice chair, I think that's the right way to proceed.
Great. Thank you. Are there any other questions? No. Can I just ask one about the training to all senior staff being provided during October 2021? That's this month, in respect of this guidance. Has that training taken place? Is it taking place?
It's already taken place.
It's taken place.
Yes.
Good. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Great. Well, if there aren't any additional questions, we will then move on to agenda item 5, which is the corporate governance report. And we have Lorraine and Kath here. Would you like to briefly introduce your reports?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Lorraine Lunt. I'm the Council's Information Governance and Feedback Team Manager, and I'm joined today by my colleague Kath Murray as the Complaints and Feedback Team Manager. The report includes the annual complaints report for April 2020 to March 2021, which has also been to Corporate Customer Services Scrutiny and Management Committee last week. It's the new set of corporate governance performance indicators. As usual, the ICO decision notices, the Ombudsman cases, an update on the disclosure log and an update on the Investigative Powers Commissioner's Office, or IPCO, inspection. So just to briefly give you an overview of the annual complaints report, it covers adult social care, children's social care and corporate complaints. It includes Ombudsman decisions of the LGSCO and the Housing Ombudsman. It includes performance levels, themes, payments made and the costs of delivering the service. And the points to note, including from the LGSCO annual letter, is that 63% of all detailed investigations that they took on were upheld, and that compares to an average of 63% across similar other local authorities. In 17% of upheld cases, the Ombudsman found that the Council had provided a satisfactory remedy before the complaint had reached the Ombudsman, and that compares to an average of 10% in similar other local authorities. The main theme from the 3 complaints procedures are issues with the quality of communications, which we are continuing to address from the implementation of the new 4 Cs in the toolkit, and to build on the improvements that the contingency plans through the response and recovery to the early stages of the lockdown has given us the opportunities to do. Under children's social care procedures, there was a reduced number of complaints in that year. In adult social care procedures, there was also a reduction in the number of complaints received. And again, under stage 1, under the corporate procedure, there was a reduction in the number of complaints received. However, that is to be taken alongside the increase in the number of comments and concerns raised with the Council. And again, that was within the work that we undertook as the contingency plan to support services and the Council at the beginning of the early first lockdown. Moving on to the corporate governance performance indicators, you will see that you're seeing now a fuller set of data and information. We are continuing to work with the business intelligence team to support providing that in graphical and picture format, and also do more information around themes and trends for you. So you've got Q1 and Q2. It also will enable us to provide more informative updates to committee going forward. There has been an improvement in the percentage of in-time performance across the majority of areas of information governance and complaints in Q2 compared to Q1. We've had 2 published decision notices since the last report to committee from the Information Commissioner's Office, and in both cases the Council had correctly withheld the information and did not require us to, and the ICO did not require us to take any further action. However, on one, which was an environment and information regulation request, that whilst we were correct in applying one exemption, we had incorrectly applied another, and we were also late with the response.
Lorraine, can I just interrupt? Is this the brief version?
I can move to questions if that's okay.
That'd be lovely. Thanks. Colleagues, are there any questions on this very comprehensive report? And I'd like to thank you very much for doing it. I've got Councillor Mason first, and then I'll go to Councillor Lomas. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Chair. The investigatory powers, you've just made a comment that there was an audit, and there was an inspection, and there was a report. I wonder if you've got any kind of headlines from that report?
It was an investigation, inspection of our use of covert surveillance and communications data. We have not yet received the report or draft report from the IPCO inspector.
That's fine. Thank you.
Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. On page 14 in our papers, section 2.3.1, the first bullet point, I got myself a bit confused in that, and it may be just because I've been reading a lot. So I'm hoping you can help me. You say that 63% of all detailed investigations were upheld. And then in the third sentence, it says, when considered from all decided cases, it is 27% were upheld. Can you just help me understand what that actually means?
Yeah, so apologies that it may not be really clear in there. What happens is the LGO takes and receives a number of cases. They then make a determination on how many they will take forward to detailed investigations. So for those that they took forward as detailed investigations, 63% were upheld. But if it's all cases that they've looked at to make a determination, it's 27% were upheld. So apologies, I will ensure that that's clear in the future.
Thank you, that's helpful. Councillor Fisher.
Chair, there's a
Oh,
question.
sorry, I missed Councillor Webb. Sorry, Councillor Webb first and then Councillor Fisher. My fault.
All right, thanks, everybody. Thank you, Lorraine. And I'd have let you keep going, but you know, it's me. But I think my first question would be sort of following on from what Councillor Lomas has just said, just further down that page where we've highlighted that in previous years, for example, 2.3.3 says there were 91 complaints and now it's down to 55. I think you mentioned this at the start when you were saying that actually due to changes in the way we are recording figures, across the board, it would appear that numbers have improved. I mean, to go from 1,262 to 502. And I was just wondering if you could outline in a bit more detail how, you know, if we were to use the old method of doing things, how would those numbers compare? How would that work?
Okay, just for clarity, those complaints received under children's social care and adult social care are set by both legislation and regulation, so it's not any changes that we've made. It is just that there's been a drop in those figures on the types of complaints, number of complaints received. We are looking at whether there was a lead into the early lockdown, but it was right at the end, so I wouldn't have thought it would have made such a drastic reduction in the figures received. For the corporate procedure, it was under the previous corporate procedure, so not the new 4Cs, which only came in and was being used from this April, so that'll be reflected in next year's annual report. However, what this does reflect is that we were able to intervene because of the contingency plans we put in place to support the rest of the service areas across council and give the customer a resolution and an outcome before it escalated to a complaint. So that's why there was a reduced number of complaints categorised as complaints and there was more categorised as comments and concerns.
Thank you. Just following up on that, I think that is positive that, you know, essentially people were being dealt with more quickly and helped, and that's a really good thing. But obviously people were still getting in touch with the council in the same numbers. It's just what would have become a complaint was dealt with sooner. But obviously, how are those comments and concerns? If something gets to a complaint, it then follows a formal process, and there are lessons learned and things like that. From maybe what we would class now as a comment, how would lessons be learned? I suppose.
It's the same process under both the previous corporate procedure and the new 4Cs toolkit approach. We take lessons learned and themes and speak with all directorate management teams, team meetings, etc., to look at what are the themes, not just in complaints, but in comments and concerns and also compliments to learn. And then we share that where we need to across other service areas, so not just with the service area that may be raised with or against. So yeah, we do the same learning process. We look at themes, trends, actions out of it, and we look to share that across different service areas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. Just a query. Would I be correct, and this may be something the Chief Finance Officer can deal with, when the Ombudsman makes an order that the recompense be paid, does that come out of the budget for that department, or is there a central fund which deals with rectifying complaints?
Yeah, it comes out of the budget for the department where the error occurred.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Back in with something else. On page 33 of our report, we're in the depths of children's services and in that section. And on page 33, it talks about total complaints made in part 11. And then there's 4 bullet points. The 4th bullet point says 4 complaints were heard at stage 3, with 1 not being pursued to the panel, but maybe in the future. I just wondered, you know, why have we left that option open? Surely we should either deal with it or not deal with it, or how, is there a reason? And is that a specific kind of thing we would do?
There is a reason. I can't go into detail, obviously, in a public forum. But yeah, there is a reason why it was considered appropriate for them to be able to delay and then potentially bring it back. What we didn't want to do is obviously rush them through to a position where they maybe weren't quite ready to make that complaint, but it was considered appropriate.
I thought that might be your answer, to be honest, but is there a standard way we can record that sort of thing, an extended process? It's just, yeah, just as thought. I know it's going to be a small number of cases, but we don't want to lose that, do we, with people change jobs and things like that?
Yes, absolutely. If it does come forward this year, then we will absolutely be recording it in this year's information. There will be, you know, without being too prescriptive with the individuals, we won't put a specific time frame on it, but it will be time limited. It won't go on and on for years.
Thank you. I've got a question, a couple of questions. On page 34, stage 1 complaints. Second paragraph. It was, however, a concern that there were a number of complaints with related themes, including a lack of action in the previous year. These were predominantly related to delays with communication and updating family members and delays in progressing work. Now, you've already made reference to one of the trends, one of the learning points being lack of communication. I'm just wondering, when cases have been lost or there's no communication coming, how is that being addressed? And are there any other themes? Right, I'll ask both my questions in one go. And what other themes are you picking up from the complaints that are coming through?
So to answer your second part of your question first, the themes are actually the natures of the complaints. So in that table below on page 34 and in other parts of that annual report, you can see the themes coming out and where we then use those to work with service areas and managers to improve those areas within their responses. However, what we've also done with the introduction of the 4Cs approach, whilst this is children's part of the report that we're referring to, that working with the team providing the end-to-end service of the investigation and owning the recommendations made to the complainant and owning the response delivery to the complainant, we hope to see that this trend drastically reduces going forward, so that we aren't just providing an administration service to social care in children's and adults and looking after the management and the monitoring and the reporting from the complaints that they receive, but doing that independent, impartial to the service area investigation and owning the provision of the recommendations and the responses going back to the complainants. So that's now back within the corporate governance team, and hopefully with the information showing in the other annex with the reports from this quarter, you can start to see that that improvement is starting to bed in and should hopefully continue going forward.
And the first part of the question, which was about the lack of action in the previous year, why was there a lack of action?
So a number of those things might have been about not necessarily updating customers and responding to phone calls, providing information. So I think the thing that we've worked on really hard in the last year, and obviously is continuing, is sometimes there may not be anything actually to update a customer with, but it's still important to tell them that and to make sure that they're aware that, you know, we are still here, we are still working on this. This is where we're up to. This is when we expect to be able to update you. And even if, again, there's nothing to update you with at that point, we'll tell you that. So I think that's kind of the biggest learning, I think, that we're trying to move forward for people. Because obviously, if people hear nothing, they are going to complain, they are going to be concerned that people are just not getting back to them. So I think that was the biggest issue.
Yeah, and so how's that manifesting itself? The work that you're doing with the teams, is it in training? Is it in individual feedback? Is it in team feedback? Is it manager feedback to manager? How's that disseminating down?
It's a bit of all of those things, I think, really. I mean, certainly what we do with complaints is we ask, it depending on what the situation is, but we will sometimes be asking that senior managers will send round emails to people, or they will discuss things in team meetings, or they will pick things up with people on an individual basis. And then we might ask for the relevant part of the minutes to be sent through to us as evidence, or a copy of that email to remind people. So we've got a copy of that, and we can see that that is actually taking place.
Did I say, yeah, I thought I saw you, Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, this might be more of a question for you, but it's about, I mean, I was looking on page 55, where I think this follows on from exactly what you've been talking about, and it is about, I think the major concern was lack of action, and halfway down that page, you've got a table that sort of separates out the different departments, directorates, sorry. So you've got economy in place, which I think that's what EAP stands for. Yes, good, got it right. And you can see there, you've gone from 559 last year to 1,056. And that's quite an increase. And the majority of that, if you sort of read on, is lack of action. And I think that's outlined with what you've just said. I was wondering, Chair, is there anything we can do maybe from a governance point of view, speaking to E&P scrutiny, for example, about this, or is there any way that actually normally happens? Because it does seem like that's a concern.
It's a really interesting question you've asked there. I've certainly got no problem with reflecting. Oh, sorry, Lorraine.
Again, apologies that we take forward all these comments to make these annual reports as clear as we can going forward. This table below isn't complaints, it's only concerns, comments and compliments. So that increase is reflected from the earlier stage 1 position that we spoke about, where we had a reduced number of complaints, but we had more comments because we addressed the issues with the customer and the contactor before it escalated into a complaint. So yeah, apologies, I'll make that table in future reports much clearer.
So what you're saying is, whilst we've got less complaints, we've got more people contacting. So we've got the same number of people contacting the council, but we're no longer classing that as a complaint, we're classing that as a concern.
It's not always a complaint.
So I think part of our contingency plans, we've been able to work with the service areas much more quickly. So previously we would get the comments, we would get the information about the complaints. So the service areas would be dealing with something as part of their business as usual. Somebody then remained unhappy after they'd had that process, and they would come through to us and it would be dealt with as a complaint. As part of our contingency plans and what we've moved forward into the new 4 Cs is that people come to us much more quickly. So at the point that they may well sometimes have been going to the service areas, if we're aware that particularly if there's a theme, if there's something that we can see customers are wanting an update about this, there's a number of those things going on, that will come through to us straight away. We will be able to have that information and get a response straight out. So we're recording that as feedback, whereas previously that may have been within the service areas. So the complaints are not, we're not seeing those comments that would have been in the service areas escalating to complaints, but we're still capturing it, and we're capturing it within our service area.
Can I just ask, because this is a supplementary and something that came up in housing scrutiny last night, about the increased times for repairs to take place on council properties. Are you getting that then subsequently reflected within complaints, comments about how those complaints are being handled? Those repairs are being handled, sorry, not complaints.
We are starting to see impact and changes to service provision and or delays or perceived delays in service provision, both in housing. We're seeing it in customer services and parking, etc., where there is potentially staff vacancies, etc. So yes, those are starting to be reflected in the numbers we're receiving at the moment.
Suspected as much. Oh, Kath, yes.
If I can just add to that as well, that's another really good example of where making sure that people are keeping people up to date. Sometimes might mean that people, yes, okay, there is a delay, but they actually know what's happening and they may want to complain about the delay, but actually they're not complaining about the fact that they haven't been kept up to date. So I think that's a really good kind of example of where that can help.
I mean, one thing I was wondering was, you know, as councillors, we often receive correspondence from constituents, our ward constituents, saying this hasn't been done, this hasn't been done. I'm really concerned, and as councillors, we then forward that through member inquiries or through the teams. Now, that's not a complaint. In as much as it is not the resident making a formal complaint, but the fact that they have written to us saying, you know, this has taken months and months and months. I'm just wondering, is that in any way reflected in your figures? Did you, for example, cross-reference with member inquiries when councillors have to intervene in a case?
So members' inquiries is dealt with directly through into customer services, and part of the assessment they will make on the information and requests that you send through is whether it's the first time we're being told of an issue. So therefore, if it is the first time that they're being told of an issue, the service area, again within the 4Cs, the definition of a complaint. If it's a missed service request, we'll go through to the service area to put right. So the classic example is you've missed my bin, and so the service request would be, we go out under the policy and collect it again if that's required, if that's the right part of the policy. If, however, you've reported a missed bin and you haven't come back for it in the stated policy, it would then become a complaint. So what members' inquiries, the staff handling members' inquiries would either divert it, they would send it to the service area if it's a missed service request, and or if they identify that it's a complaint, they would send it through to us and we would deal with it through our process.
Okay,
so where it does become a complaint, it would be reflected in our figures if it's made through members' inquiries or any other contact route.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions? No, thank you. That's really helpful. It's a good consideration of your report, and thank you, members, for the range of questions. Sorry, Lorraine.
Just to let you know that there was a couple of corrections and further information that was asked on the annual complaints report from the scrutiny committee last Monday. I have got all that information ready to be sent out to them, but I will also include it to yourselves at some point tomorrow. I'll be able to send it out, and it's also a correction on one table on the annual complaint report, so I'll circulate it to both committees.
Can I just clarify with you then, Lorraine? Do you bring exactly the same report and go through exactly the same thing that you've done with us this evening in corporate scrutiny?
For the annual complaints report, yes, it goes to corporate scrutiny first and then comes to yourself for information, etc.
Right. Oh, that's helpful. That's helpful to know. Thank you. Thank you. You can go. Well done. What's the result? So, agenda item 6 is the review of the Constitution. We are going to move that agenda item, Max will be very pleased to hear, in favour of agenda item 7, which is the report from Max from Internal Audit, which is the Audit and Counter Fraud Progress Report. And we're all getting chilly apart from Councillor Wan, who's still in shirt sleeves. Well, what was that? What was that? What was that advert? Was it Ready Break or something? Where he had this internal thing, advertising breakfast cereals. Yes. Anyway, Max, all yours.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Max Thomas. I'm from the Council's shared service provider Verito. I'm also the Council's head of internal audit. So this is our regular report where we detail the internal audit and counter fraud work that we've undertaken since the last time we reported to this committee back in June. As usual with these reports, there are 2 annexes. The first annex covers internal audit work and it details the audit reports we've finalised since the last committee. For those reports, summarises the areas that were included within the scope of the audit, the findings, and where there were issues identified, the actions that have been agreed with management. We've also detailed the current status of current year audit work and provided an indication of the priorities for the remainder of the year. So the work that we have got planned to do next and later in the year. And then finally, there's details of the follow-up testing that we've undertaken on those actions that have fallen due within the period. And then the second part of the report is Annex 2, and that just summarises the counter fraud work that we've undertaken and the outcomes we've achieved. So happy to take questions on the report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Max. Page 97, current priorities for internal audit work. We've got category 1, do now, category 2, to do next, and category 3, do later. Now, I suppose my question is when is later? I was particularly interested, for example, in section 106 agreements and the audit work around that. So, you know, how do you set out the timings for this?
Well, this table is sort of trying to give an indication of what's scheduled to be done next and then what follows on after that. Now, in terms of the do later audits, the intention is that we will complete those before the end of the year. In most cases, we've scheduled when that work will take place, but with all our audit work, it tends to be quite fluid. So audits will be brought forward if it becomes more of a priority. Other audits may be delayed for a variety of reasons, and that could include, you know, the service just isn't ready, or, you know, there's other priorities. So that there's always a degree of movement, but certainly those audits which are in category 3 to do later, we are currently, let's say currently, planning to do this year. Clearly, other things may happen which you know, we then need to prioritise ahead of those. So there is always the possibility that some of those audits will then drop into the following year.
Thank you. I had Councillor Lomas, then I had Councillor Mason, yeah, and Councillor Fisher. Councillor Lomas.
Thanks, Max. I've got 2 questions now, but they're both quite quick, hopefully. But just to follow on from the answer you just gave to Councillor Webb, can you give an example maybe of why a department might not be ready for an audit? What sort of circumstances would bring that about?
Well, it can be a variety of reasons. So, I mean, for example, They might be implementing a new system and that's been delayed. They might have, considerable staff absences for one reason or another. So, we do try and understand the pressures that many services are under, and we will reschedule work if it's appropriate. Now, clearly, sometimes that, we do need to do the audit, and therefore we need to do the work. But there are some services where certain times of the year it is just not helpful for us to do an audit, and we have to reflect that.
Did you have supplementary, Councillor Lomas? Yeah.
If I could just quickly ask my other question, which is
Oh, yeah,
related.
very good, yeah.
On page 95, in the second table, it says 2020/21 audits brought forward, but is that really just the ones that were deferred because of the circumstances in the pandemic, or are we talking about, because to me bringing forward means bring forward in time, not delay to later in time. So I was just a bit confused by that.
Okay, that might be slightly confusing, but those are audits which were scheduled for last year. For one reason or another, they weren't finalised in time. It could be simply that the work was done, we issued the report, but we hadn't finalised it. In other cases, the work actually hadn't been completed, mostly due to the issues around the pandemic.
Councillor Mason.
Thank you. Just going back to the Safety Advisory Group governance, it seems, or it feels like an odd thing for an internal audit to be looking at. I just wondered if there's any context.
Ashley, could you speak into the mic? Because I can't
Sorry,
hear
I'm
you.
trying to look at Max and the internal audit looking at the safety advisory governance just feels like an odd thing for them to do, and something that's given so much priority. Is internal audit the right mechanism if it's been flagged by senior officers as needing to be on there? There's other things on that list that personally as a councillor I feel have more priority than a safety advisory group, and maybe it is important, but maybe you're the wrong person. I don't know, just some context would be useful.
Okay.
Chair, sorry, I couldn't hear what item you were referring to. Sorry, Councillor Mason.
The bit that Councillor Webb was referring to, the safety advisory group.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
I suppose there's two issues. One is it is a very long time. If I can't actually recall when we've last audited that area, so it is for that reason it probably warrants an audit. We timed it for this year because it was an issue that was discussed within GRAG. So officers in the council identified areas that they think audit should look at, and this was one of them. So that's the reason why it was included.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
I was interested to see procurement and contract management in the do later. When was the last time that area was looked at by internal audit? Because in my experience, procurement and contract management, if not done to a very high standard, is a very easy way to pour a lot of money straight down a black hole. If you don't get that right, you can cost a lot of money. So when was the last time it was looked at, please?
I would need to check that, but I'm fairly confident that it's an audit it's an area that is included in audit plans every year. Because given the potential risks to the council if contracts aren't delivering as they should do. So having said that, it's a very large area, so we will always try and focus on the areas, the particular contracts which are the most risky or where there are particular issues that have been highlighted.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair. Max, thank you for the report. Can you just give me some idea of the extent and when you might implement spot audits? Because it seems to me from your report that you go into a department having given them quite a lot of notice, and there's always the tendency for department heads then to do some window dressing and some housekeeping to ensure that the audit comes out better than otherwise would be. Thanks.
Okay, I mean, traditionally, and I say traditionally, we're probably going back 20 years or so, auditors would do a lot of spot checks, but actually modern audit practice is to work with management to help understand what the risks are, to help management manage those risks and to make improvements. So rather than being seen as a sort of a function which is sort of policing managers, the whole purpose is to work with management, and therefore we will mostly give managers advance knowledge, notification that there is going to be an audit. Just occasionally there are particular issues, and it tends to be where there's just, you know, allegations of misconduct or fraud, where it is appropriate for us to do a spot check, but that tends to be relatively rare.
Yeah, thank you. And I know Councillor Mason brought up the Safety Advisory Group, but requested by senior management. Is this the question that you asked, Councillor Mason? I'm really sorry. I genuinely couldn't hear.
No, it's
what
fine.
you were
It's
saying.
fine. It was a little bit around why internal audit, if it's been flagged as an issue, are they the right people to do it, given the other important things on that agenda?
Right.
But I suppose it does bring a
I
question.
suppose my question's slightly different then. I'm always a bit wary when senior managers ask you to do an audit. Is that because they don't expect you to see any problems, and it's an opportunity for a pat on the back? Oh, that's good.
Can I respond as a senior manager? So just a bit of clarity around the Safety Advisory Group request. This came from the Director of Public Health, because the Safety Advisory Group had quite a significant role to play in delivery against some of the health protection regulations which came out during the pandemic. It was also recognised by a number of officers that, as Max has already indicated, it was a long time since this group had been looked at. And it's about the prominent role it plays in being an advisory group and source of support to members of the community. Is it keeping people safe? Is there anything that we can do to support that? So that is the reason why it's on there, because it's actually prioritised its significance and importance in supporting the community, and it's seen as part of recovery. So we just wanted the assurance that it was fit for purpose, it had all of the right terms of reference, etc. So it's looking at its governance framework. So the request specifically came from the Director of Public Health, linked with her experiences with the health protection regulations and the involvement of that group and the advice that group gives as part of the kind of coming out of lockdown in terms of support for the community. So that is the reason why it was asked to be put on.
Well, if it's coming from Sharon, I'm all in favour of it.
Just to clarify that when it's predominantly myself and Debbie in our statutory positions that may put the most requests to internal audit, it's where we require sources of assurance. So we want to know if they're problems. Equally, we're pleased to know that they're not problems. The role of internal audit is a fundamental part of the sources of assurance that Debbie and I need in terms of our statutory roles, to ensure that all of the services delivered by the council are both financially prudent and run in accordance with financial responsibility, but also delivered in a lawful manner as well. So we are probably, the two of it is the biggest sort of demand on internal audit of asking questions, and for us it's such a valuable source of assurance that we want to know if there are problems, and equally we want to know if there's not problems.
So do you then discuss with Max and Verito what order they go in, which ones are urgent, which ones are next, and which ones are due later?
No. We are entitled to express our preference. However, it very much depends on the work that internal audit are doing and they're prioritising, because, for example, they may be doing audit work which we're not aware of, and it just happens to coincide with the comments that Debbie and I are either raising or we've come across this, would you mind having a look at it? And it may be linked or a theme that's coming out of other audit work. So I am very much of the position where I think internal audit needs to be respected. I think it's a two-way process of sharing information, and it's part of the 3 strands of assurance for the governance framework for the council. One of those is an effective dialogue between the statutory officers and internal audit. And it's very much respecting the independence of internal audit so that they take on the information, the concerns or comments that we may have, or could you just, we need that assurance. And then we leave it very much to the independence of internal audit to then look at scoping based on what they've heard, and also the prioritisation depending on their wider knowledge of the audit themes that they're undertaking. So we try and absolutely maintain to protect the independence of internal audit.
So members of this committee, and I did have a conversation with Max earlier on in the week. I flagged up one area which I felt was becoming a significant risk, and that was building repairs and building services and housing repairs. And I felt that this was an area that very much could be perceived, and it was accepted last night as being a failing area for the council. So I would have thought that that might have been something that this committee could recommend be moved up the list for a more urgent audit. I don't want to. Max and I had a discussion as the chair of audit with our officers present, which is in our constitution and in the framework that chairs of audit should have. I don't know. Do I have to agree with you, or does this committee have to give an opinion on it? Max.
Well, you know, as the Council's Audit Committee, it is helpful to hear your views, particularly around the prioritisation of work, and also to hear your views about the relative sort of risk of the plan, you know, the areas that we're going to audit. And we will take those views on board and, you know, reflect that in the sort of scheduling of work. Now, you know, we did have a discussion around housing repairs and maintenance. It's clearly an emerging issue for the council. It is already in the plan or the programme of work. So I think it's probably for us, it's more a discussion about what the scope of that piece of work might be, and also how we can best provide benefit to the council, because actually there's little point in going in and just saying everything, you know, there are issues when those issues are already known. Equally, we don't want to go in and sort of divert management's attention away from addressing those issues, but we clearly have a role, and it may be, I'm suggesting that role might be to provide some assurance that some of the actions that are now planned are actually having an effect and are being delivered.
Councillor Webb.
Thank you. I think you've raised a really good point there, and I back up what Max has just finished with there, that actions that have been suggested that are going to be taken, I think it would be absolutely vital. Speaking as a councillor who represents, you know, one of the larger groups of council tenants in the city, I think it's, you know, this might be an emerging issue for councils, for this council, but it's a long-standing issue for residents, for tenants. And I really do think that looking at how comments and complaints are dealt with, and the timeliness and the length of time between submitting a concern and something being dealt with would be something I hope that we could look at.
I mean, I certainly have some thoughts on what the scope of your audit could be, but perhaps this isn't the forum to share them with you. So But thank you very much. Are there any other questions for Max? I don't think we can take them from the floor, but Mr. Mendes did raise a couple of areas. I don't know whether you made note of them or whether you were able to make note of them.
I can remember some of them.
So some of them, some of the comments around the project management issues, some were as well around the audits undertaken with schools.
Oh.
And was there feedback given to the schools? And there was also questions around council tax and NDR as well.
I couldn't hear you. Are you able to answer any of those?
I can try and answer some of those. So yeah. So the issue of reconciliations between the valuation office and council tax system, they have been addressed. So the corruption of the data was dealt with, and those reconciliations are taking place and are up to date. So that's all satisfied. I think there was a question around how many, why did we only look at 9 maintained schools? With all school, our work with schools is limited to maintained schools, and we do themed audits. We don't go and do detailed audits in individual schools. So it's a theme. This particular theme, we decided to include 9 maintained schools. So it's a relatively high proportion of the total. Having selected them, we did require them to provide information. You know, there was no choice in that. Our client is the council, so we were feeding back to the council and advising the council on what further advice they needed to give to those schools and to schools the maintained schools generally. So the results were fed back to the relevant business managers and heads in those schools. So,
good, thank you.
And there was another question which I've forgotten. Project management. So the issue there were 2 real issues. One was that we felt that the framework needed to be tightened up because there was a lack of clarity about which elements of the project management framework were mandatory or not, and also how risks were assessed and reported. So those were the sort of 2 issues we identified in the audit. Both those issues have been accepted and are being addressed.
Lovely, thank you very much. Well, if there are no further questions, can I suggest that we now take this opportunity to have a little bit of a break, 5–10 minutes, and then we'll get into the substantive agenda item, which is the Constitution. Time is it now? 22. Shall we say 10 minutes? I think 10 minutes is a good break. 10–2. Thank you. Thanks and welcome back. Sorry that took a little bit longer than I expected. So we're now moving into the discussion on the Constitution, which was agenda item 6 and is now agenda item 7. And before we get into detailed discussions, we have a short presentation from the monitoring officer. So I shall just move my chair.
Oh, hang on. Thank you, Chair. So the report was written at a time before the Chair and I had an opportunity to meet and for the Chair to advise me of the specific sections that he wished the committee to consider this evening. So there are some general updates which I will come to after this presentation around other aspects of the Constitution. In the discussions with the Chair that we've had, the proposal is this evening that apologies for turning my back on you. Articles 1, 2, 3 and 4 are replicated from the current section 2 of the Constitution, and therefore the chair of the committee has asked if members of this committee would be minded to give their written feedback on whether there's any updates required, whether there's any amendments that you would suggest. There has been, just for clarity, as indicated on the slide, update to reference the 4 Cs. That was the old complaint system that is referred to. Throughout in these articles, we have amended job descriptions where they've changed because of the CMT restructure. And we've also included Article 3, a reference to equal opportunities, which is absent in the current Constitution. So we've added that in. Chair, are you happy for me just to go through the slides, one after the other? However, as indicated on the last meeting, and Mr. Watson is present this evening, it was not the same position for Article 5, which relates to the Lord Mayor and the Sheriff and the chairing of council. This is because, as been sort of very eloquently put this evening, is that in March 2020, there was consideration of a deputy sheriff. And at the October 2020 full council meeting, Mr. Watson expressed concerns around the position of a deputy sheriff being referenced into the Constitution. At the request of the committee following the last meeting, I obviously contacted Mr. Watson. He's here this evening and has participated in public participation. Therefore, the chair has asked that the committee consider Mr. Watson's views and give a view generally in respect of the position of deputy sheriff, which is at paragraph 2.1 of the draft Article 5. So that is the reference, and that replicates currently the amendments which were made in 2020, which were added to the current Constitution. The chair has then, conscious of time as well, the chair has then also considered that the committee should be invited to debate Article 6, 9, which is this committee's updated terms of reference. We've again updated them to make them more explicit and more detailed in terms of the roles and functions and responsibilities of this committee. And also Article 11, which is Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee, because the terms of reference of that committee have changed and the chair felt it prudent to discuss those at this committee. By very virtue of discussing the article relating to Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee, it would then fall to the committee to look at Appendix 12. Now, Appendix 12 is the Officer Employment Procedure Rules. These have been in the current Constitution. If you compare the current Constitution to the revised version have been significantly updated, and there's a lot more detail placed in Appendix 12, so it is quite lengthy. But this now contains a lot more of the guidance which is provided to us by the JNC Handbook for Chief Executives, which is statutory officer. So we have put a lot more detail in from the JNC Handbook for terms and conditions. The chair's view when we spoke So I had in mind quite a period of time, whether we get to this or not, I'm not sure, is for debating Appendix 12 this evening as well. Just to reassure, the chair has also is not envisaging that this is also debated by the cross-party working group. So the chair has been mindful that the articles in the appendix put forward for this evening's meeting are very much ones that he would like, and the vice chair as well in previous conversations would like this committee to focus on, because he believes that there are significant importance for this committee to be minded about. Chair, that's the end of the presentation. I'll just go back to the beginning of it.
Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, so I just give an update, just whilst my microphone is on, just to give an update on the details which are contained within the Constitution, because there have been some intervening events which I just need to update this committee since this report was published. Sorry, since this report was published, and that is that sorry, on page 84, there are two subheadings there. One is the Members' Code of Conduct, and one is the Standing Advisory Council on Religious Education. So I just want to highlight again that the Members' Code of Conduct is on the agenda for full council tomorrow evening. And depending on the decision of full council, appendices 16, 17 and 18 will be reviewed in accord to ensure that they comply with the new model code that's been provided by the LGA. The Joint Standards Committee is now also commenced its work on reviewing the procedures that will support the model code of conduct, and they're receiving support from Hoey Ainscoe. Hoey Ainscoe have also provided the training to members and key officers as well in terms of the implications of the model code and its understanding, and refresher training or supplemental further training sessions can be put on if the need requires. In terms of the Standing Advisory Council on Religious Education, this committee met and has considered the revisions to its constitution. And I'm pleased to say that SACRE has now confirmed its constitution, and so they will be circulated to members of this committee separately, because if you can then disregard the draft that's within the current constitution, the draft constitution that I circulated to you for the 8th of September meeting, those terms of reference for SACRE have now been approved by SACRE, so they will be forming part of this draft constitution. But that is a statutory committee. They are required by law to approve their own governance arrangements, and then those will go normally directly to full council. But because you're reviewing the entire constitution, we're providing those for information and for inclusion in these papers anyway. But that work has now been completed with SACRE. So there's no requirement for this committee to look through those apart from for information at this stage. So those are my updates, Chair.
Marvellous. Thank you very much. Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. And as I said earlier in my email to you, I apologise if I'm just getting myself hopelessly confused with this, but I suspect I might not be the only one. The cross-party working group that are doing some work looking at some different aspects, will this committee be receiving feedback from them? And at what point do we sort of consider saying, well, okay, this is ready to go to full council? What's the time frame for that? What's the sort of, I like having time frames. I know. And you, you know me so well. But I like to understand what we're working towards and what we're working within, because I think I've just lost sight of that a little bit. So that would be really helpful to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally understand that this is a very hefty tome, and taking feedback from one of our previous meetings, which I think was the 8th of September, when this committee's view was, is there any way in which we can share the load? And one of the public participants, I think it was Councillor Kilbane, proposed that there be wider input from members and indeed the public, a call went out to all members as to whether they would wish to join a cross-party working group, and a number of colleagues, including myself and Councillor Fisher, put ourselves forward for that. We then, following with discussions with the monitoring officer, looked at the areas of the articles and appendices that I felt had to remain within the remit of audit and governance to look at, and which ones could be considered quite appropriately by the working party. I'm calling it the working party, but it is the cross-party working group. But let's call it a working party for the sake of argument. What will happen is that group is meeting on a weekly basis. They have homework, if you like, and then we discuss any ideas, recommendations for alterations, and the PA for the monitoring officer is inputting them onto a database, essentially. What will happen then is that they are just recommendations. They are not set in stone. That working party does not have the authority to, sorry.
Sorry, Chair, that's not why I asked. I asked, will we, this group, be getting feedback?
Yes, you will.
And what is the time frame for
So
this? Because when we last discussed this in September, early September, there seemed to be this urgency that we had to get this all done so it could go to full council. So I'm asking about that because there seems to be a change, and I just want to understand the time frame.
So the working party's work will be completed by November, by the beginning of November. So we'll be ready for consideration by us at the meeting on the 20th of November. Our work, these articles that we're going to be looking at this evening and the appendix, and then the other articles and other appendices will also be covered in November. Now, that's where the provisional element of this becomes incredibly relevant. This process, as I've said on numerous occasions, but it's worth repeating, will take as long as it takes. There is a desire for it to come to full council on the 16th of December. If we haven't had the opportunity to have completed our work by the November meeting and are in a position to approve it going forward, then it will miss that 16th of December full council date. The next full council date beyond that is, I believe, in March, which is when it will then have to go to that meeting. So we will have more opportunities to debate any areas that we haven't been able to cover either this evening or on the 20th of November. So yes, there's a provisional date that we will have our work completed by the 20th of November. If we haven't, it will take as long as it takes. Does that cover that? Yes, cool, excellent. So thank you for the presentation. So I'd like us to now move to article number 5, which is No, it's, yes, article number, it's page 59. That's right. Just got there. So this is the Lord Mayor of York, the Sheriff of York, and chairing the council. And as you've heard from Alderman Watson, there are some questions specifically around the 2.1, which was the sheriff may appoint a deputy. I think this is an area that we do need to consider. I will ask the monitoring officer what the rationale was for incorporating that change. But it's then for this committee to agree or otherwise as to whether they want that to remain.
Chair, if I can, Chair, what Brian is suggesting is probably the best way forward. It might save a huge amount of time. That there is a codified under-sheriff role in the Civic Guide. We just replace deputy for under-sheriff. That can save us spending a lot of time going through it. And that sounds like that's an agreeable way forward for everybody. Unless people have got a real desire to talk about under-sheriffs.
Monitoring officer, basically, I will defer to you. I'm not saying we don't do that. I'm just saying, is there any reason why we couldn't do that?
There's no reason why you couldn't do this, but I do think the intention of doing this was following the experiences that Councillor Looker had, and to formalise the position that should the circumstance arise again, then there should be an ability for the sheriff to appoint a deputy. I think Councillor Looker probably put that a lot better at the last meeting, because she was here on behalf of Councillor Lomas on the last occasion and gave her reasoning for it and supported the concept of the Constitution, including the ability of the sheriff to appoint a deputy. But I'm afraid this occurred before I joined York.
Yes, it did.
So I can't really answer that much more, I'm afraid.
Councillor Fisher.
I think there's also a subtle difference here between a deputy sheriff and an interim sheriff, because if you remember that Dafford Williams took the job to replace Mrs. Tewart, I think it was, who Triffitt, or I can't remember her name, unfortunately, who couldn't actually do the job because she was away and she'd been appointed short notice. There is a subtle difference between deputy and interim, which I think we also need to be a little bit careful about.
I mean, my thoughts on this were that there may be occasions, I will come to you, Councillor Lomas. My thoughts on it, there may be occasions, they may be incredibly rare. It's certainly not the intention of this constitution, and indeed our intention, that there will always be a deputy sheriff appointed. It would be an in extremis position, such as we found in 2019. The previous constitution had no facility in it to appoint a deputy sheriff. I'm not really sure how that actually then subsequently came about, but it was to say, you know, there may be an occasion in which a deputy sheriff may be required. Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. For me, this is about making it explicit that we do intend a difference between may and will, because it doesn't say the sheriff will appoint a deputy, it says the sheriff may appoint a deputy. And perhaps if we just add one or two more words in there, may in certain circumstances, or if circumstances require it, appoint a deputy. So, for example, if we appointed a sheriff and they then needed to take some time away from the role during their year of office, we may want to appoint a deputy to fill in for them in similar circumstances to happened with Joe Trifle. But if we just added a couple of words in there to say it's not a will, it is a may, if circumstances require, then I think we've probably covered that. The question I had for the monitoring officer was about the under-sheriff. I've never heard of an under-sheriff before. Alderman Watson obviously raised that, and I just wanted clarity. Is that intended to be part of the Civic Party? Because I couldn't find reference to it, but I might just have missed it.
For me, no, because for the civic role of the sheriff and the Lord Mayor is that it's civic. The under sheriff, I must admit, I'm not familiar with either, because it's not been a position that has been in authorities where I've worked previously. So I would need to find out more from the civic office. Don't really want to put Councillor Mason on the spot because but perhaps not. It is an appointment that is made, but it's not necessarily something that has been formally reflected in the current constitution, and therefore I've just taken what has been in the current constitution respecting the position around the Lord Mayor and the Sheriff and replicated it into Article 5.
Members, and I don't know if this is legal, and I'm sure the monitoring officer will slap me if it isn't, but I think, given that Councillor Watson has raised this, and let's be honest, he's gotten far more experience about this than any of us, I would be happy to co-opt him for this issue only onto the committee, just to clarify certain aspects of under sheriffdom.
Can I just clarify that you don't co-opt?
Can I not?
He's here as a member of the public, so it's your wish if you want to hear from members of the public.
Oh,
but then
great. Well, that's what I wish. Yes. Yes. All right. I'm affording the. What am I doing? I'm affording the.
Well, you're affording him the duty to speak, but you can invite him to speak from the floor.
I'm inviting you to speak from the floor, Alderman Watson. Right. Explain to us why you felt that an under-sheriff would fulfil the role of the deputy, as we've talked about it this evening. Your microphone, Brian.
It still needs a little bit of explaining, doesn't it? The under-sheriff always signed such things as writs, which were in the sheriff's format. The last sheriff to do that was way back in 1974 or something.
Right.
And then when it changed from the unitary authorities and all this, that and the other, that disappeared. So they had to have a solicitor to sign the writs.
Mm.
And that came about by calling him an under-sheriff. Now, when the last change of authority came along, in, what was it, 2000 or something like that, after that, he never had anything to do, as far as I can work out. But he was still appointed because that was part of the system on Lord Mayor's Day. I think it's the sheriff, the High Sheriff of Yorkshire, that deals with all that nowadays. So, but it still stays there. It still stayed as an under-sheriff, just because he was in the system, as it were. But he was allowed to go to 4 functions a year or something like that.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Alderman Watson. Councillor Mason.
So the Civic Guide, which is the kind of document that I suppose codifies all the different parts of the job you do for the year, it lists all these different people. So obviously there's chaplains that aren't covered in the Constitution, which Lord Mayor or Sheriff might appoint. And the under-sheriff in that document is appointed by the Sheriff. I'm not reading it, I'm just looking at my screen. Yeah, there's 5 functions that the under-sheriff attends as a minimum: Remembrance Sunday, annual council, whatever else. So I suppose, yeah, it's probably the same as being a chaplain. Isn't in the Constitution, but it's a role that's appointed at annual council.
Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. My proposal then, to move us along a little bit, is that we just add a couple more words in that sentence around a deputy. The under-sheriff will remain as part of the Civic Code. Sorry, get it right. And just add a couple more words to say, if circumstances require it, the sheriff may appoint a deputy, and I think that's dealt with. I do have another question about this section.
Please do. So have I. Yes. No, you go first.
One of the things that I have raised ever since I got elected and went to my first ever annual council was issues of gender. And I do appreciate we have no control over titles such as Lord Mayor. However, I do think that we should make reference in our constitution to the fact we have no control over pointless gendering of roles like Lord Mayor, but that the roles are open to people of any or no gender, despite the terminology that we have to use. And I think that's important because research shows that when roles have a gender attached to them, either due to common perception or due to the words that are used to describe the role, then girls and women do not put themselves forward for the role. They do not see themselves in the role. They do not see that as something that is open to them. Research, I can give you some quotes of that. There are loads. There's research all over the place around it. But I do think that where we are stuck with pointless gendering, we should reference it in our constitution, and we should make it absolutely explicitly clear that because of equal opportunities, people of any and no gender can fulfil these roles.
Thank you.
Chair, this was a matter that was raised at the cross-party working group, if you recall, and there will be some clarity around that issue as well as others in the introduction to the Constitution. And we explained to the cross-party working group, the introduction is the last thing to be written, because then we've got clarity of what we're writing about and how we're introducing the Constitution. So in the current Constitution, there is an introduction at the beginning. For example, purpose and content of the Constitution, what does the council do, allowances, elections, etc. And all of that is to be rewritten once we know sort of what our Constitution looks like. So it has been an issue that's been addressed in the cross-party working group.
Thank you, that's really helpful, and I think that will indeed help. And I just ask that every time we have a gendered role title, that cross-reference is made to that introduction with that explanation. Thank you.
Yeah, that's incredibly helpful. Sorry, did you want to say something else?
Sorry, Mr. Watson also questioned the content of paragraph 1 of Article 5, which is the deletion or not of 4-year term from memory. So this was an amendment that was made by the committee in March 2020. So in March 2020, the amendment was made to say the Lord Mayor must have 4 years service as a City of York elected councillor and have been elected to serve a further term. So the 4-year reference has been deleted. So that was the amendment that was agreed by the committee in March 2020. And that bit was approved by full council in October 2020. So I just wanted to clarify that because it was raised.
And I take it we are, Councillor Fisher, I take it we're happy to keep that.
I take your point, but what about councillors who have previous service on councils that were amalgamated into City of York? Because I have 9 years service on the Rydale District Council, which was then became a constituent council, the part I represented. I'm classed in terms of seniority of having 9 years plus the term I've served here. So I just wonder whether that's an issue that should be dealt with. Maybe the only council that's in that position, but not that I want to be Lord Mayor, but I will be able to be an alderman if I serve 12 years on this council, because my previous 9 years will count.
Before you speak, Councillor Webb, do you have a point in respect of that?
I think we discussed this at length in March last year, and my opinion remains the same, that it should just be for the council that we're talking about, which is this council, the City of York Council. I understand your unique position, Councillor Fisher, but I just don't think it's worth going over this specific issue.
Monitoring officer, I think you wanted to comment.
I was just going to comment that I think that was addressed last year, just to echo the comments made from Councillor Webb that it was a debate that happened. What we've not included in here is the points system around the Lord Mayor arrangement. So that is not included in the Constitution because that sits outside of this with the groups, with the respective groups. So I would imagine, and that is a scheme that, to be fair, I have not looked at.
I've got one query that I would just like. There's no reference to term of office in an emergency, and we've just been through an emergency. Is there any scope for saying it will be longer than one term? It can be longer than one term if there is an emergency and we're not able to have an annual council.
So that scenario only came about because legislation allowed that to happen. So that was the coronavirus legislation issued by the government, which gave flexibility to all councils to whether or not to have an annual council in May due to the lockdown. So the flexibility was given that anybody in positions could carry on for a second term without having an annual council. So I don't think I can put that in because that was as a result of primary legislation.
Okay, that's helpful. That's helpful. I will give you the opportunity, not Councillor Watson, former Councillor Watson, Alderman Watson. Your microphone.
I've got to switch it off last time. Can I just point out that there's no restrictions on who is a Lord Mayor? The only restriction is that there's got to be a councillor. And then they appoint a sheriff. There's no restriction on what. And in fact, the last lady sheriff we had was just before Janet Lucas started her last term, which was Jill Burnett, who passed away just the other month or so. So we've had quite a few ladies who have been sheriffs over the past years, you know.
Oh, Councillor Carr, can you switch your mic on, Councillor Watson?
Just, I'm sorry to be pedantic, actually, Chair, but in 1.1, it says that the councillor must have been elected to serve a further term. He's already, or he or she is already a serving councillor. So that wording is superfluous.
So, Chair, if I may, I'm notified whether who will be the next Lord Mayor in the December. If there is an election the following May, that nomination from December the previous year needs to be re-elected in order to take up the position in the May. So that would be every 4 years. That would be relevant every 4 years. Oh, sorry, I'm just conscious.
Sorry, the acoustics in this room are bad enough for that.
This particular sentence actually applies every 4 years because in December I am notified of the potential appointment of the next Lord Mayor for the following year from annual council in the following year from the May. If there is an election in the May, that person who's been nominated as the Lord Mayor needs to be re-elected in order to take up the position of Lord Mayor. So that sentence applies once every 4 years.
And that person is no longer serving councillor in that May.
They would have to be a serving
Yes,
councillor in order to take up the appointment. So I'm notified of the appointment of the potential appointment in the December, but if there's an election in May, that all city councillors go out for election, and to take up the positions that they've been offered, they have to be re-elected in the May. So that one sentence applies every 4 years.
Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to clarify, just because a woman has held a position doesn't mean to say that the fact that the position is called a Lord Mayor is not putting women off and making women believe that it's not a role for them. Janet Looker was an absolutely magnificent Lord Mayor for 2 years this time, and she's done it previously. That does not mean that there are not women and girls out there who look at the fact that we have a Lord Mayor and say, well, that's not for me then. And this is a really important point, and I just think we should not have any more contributions on that from the floor, Chair, because I think it's confusing the matter.
I think we're ready to move on.
Can I just say,
because
Chair, more importantly, we probably want to put that on the website, so we're not on here because, well, it's important in here, but it's more important on the website because that's where most people will find it. So maybe that's another action to look at the website.
And the Constitution will go on the website. So you're absolutely correct, Councillor Mason. So are we in agreement that the form of words suggested by Councillor Lomas in respect of the Deputy Lord Mayor be Deputy Sheriff, thank you very much, be agreed and put forward as our proposal for full council. Yes, thank you. And thank you, Alderman Watson. We'll now move on to Article 6, which is the leader of the council and the executive. Certainly this is an area that has had some discussion previously. So I will open, no, sorry, that's not the presentation. I will open this up to questions, and we've got a question from Councillor Webb, not a question necessarily, it's just a point.
No, it is a question. In the last year's executive, or the executive last year, there was an executive member who was an executive member without portfolio. And looking through this section 2.1, for example, I couldn't necessarily find exactly a reference to executive without portfolio. Now, whilst I was just seeking clarification, is that because we're saying no to that position, or is that because we just don't need to put it in, really, I suppose?
Okay. Actually, you don't need to put it in. It's the leader's gift of the appointment of executive members. There can be up to 10 members in the executive, and it's for the leader to determine the name and nature of those portfolios. Many councils during the pandemic last year had an executive member without portfolio to take on issues arising from the pandemic. Some councils do have a member without portfolio that can take on urgent items, project work, key delivery issues. So it really is the gift of the leader. What you may see if you have read Appendix 1 is that we are required to list the portfolios, and that is a page or a section that will be updated every time the leader changes portfolios. So we are required to put them in the Constitution, but it is the leader's gift as long as there's no more than 10 councillors.
Thank you. There are just one or two typos before I get onto you on paragraph 2.1 as the determined, and 5.1 it shouldn't have an S on it. It should be A should be just resign from office. Yeah. Unless they resign from office, not resigns from office. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. Section 5.2 on page 65. I was interested to know what we mean by an executive or any committee of it. Does that mean a committee, for example, a scrutiny committee? Because obviously they're not really part of the executive. So if I read that correctly, that means there are different rules for disqualification for members of the executive from members of the general members of the council. Is that correct?
No, but there are some committees which are purely committees of the executive. So, for example, shareholders committee is a committee of the executive. So, if the executive member fails to attend executive and the committee for 6 months, then they fall foul. So it's the same 6-month rule. It's just that there are committees of the executive. This is where it gets a bit complicated. So shareholders is a committee of the executive.
So if that same executive member attended meetings of one of the regulatory committees like planning or that, then
that is with them being as a City of York councillor, such as yourselves, for example. So it's the other committees that they may be appointed to. So the 6-month rule still applies, but we just have, because this section only applies to the leader and the executive members, we just have to be clear here that there are committees of the executive, such as shareholders, and we're trying to be transparent here that you have to attend executive and or the committee for within the 6 months, or else you're disqualified. So we're just making it clear that executive are subject to the same rules as other committees. So it's the 6-month rule applies to all councillors. We're just being explicit here that it also includes executive members with the executive committees, in case they're not appointed to any other committee.
With respect, I'm not convinced that it does.
No.
Because what you're saying there is if they fail to attend any meeting of the executive or any committee of it, they cease to be a member of the council.
Yeah, that's right.
So therefore, it wouldn't matter if they attended other committees that were not part of the
Oh, I see
executive.
what you mean. Yes, we'll clarify that.
I think that needs to be clarified because that seems to suggest that they can be disqualified from council when they are attending other committees to which they're appointed, such as planning or obviously not audit and governance, but
Licensing.
yes, licensing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put that.
Just think that needs clarifying.
Yeah. Councillor Ware.
Yeah, it's on this executive committee thing. Point 8, committees of the executive. Executive shall have power to establish one or more committees of the executive and to delegate powers to any such committees. Is there any reasoning for that? Is there any specific examples? Is there times when they couldn't delegate powers to a committee? You know, I just think that just that one paragraph just seems like it could do with expanding a little bit with a bit more detail. Or is that in a subsequent appendix that I haven't yet read?
So there are details in Appendix 1 about the different styles of committees, the different roles and responsibilities, and it also details it in their areas such as local choice functions, etc. There are some specific tasks in local government legislation which are purely ring-fenced to the work of the executive. And so off the top of my head, the only example that we've got is to manage the tech-owl companies. The council has set up a shareholder committee, which is a committee of the executive.
I just wonder then, because I imagine C Appendix 1 is going to be a common answer for a lot of these questions. Is it worth, in situations like that, 8.1, just in just in brackets afterwards, refer to Appendix 1, and I imagine there's several situations like this.
Yeah, that's fine.
Good. Now, I've got a question, 4.2. The leader appoints the executive and the deputy leader. The leader is vacant. The deputy leader must act in the leader's place. If the deputy leader, then it just says the executive, but the executive has been appointed by the leader. So therefore, surely, once the leader has gone, there is no executive.
So, this is going to get quite complicated, and this is linked with the council procedure rules. So specific references now to the position around the leader and the circumstances where the leader is not available or removed from office, put it that way. The deputy leader will automatically take responsibility, but if the council meeting, for example, that has the vote of no confidence of the leader and that vote of no confidence is successful, the options are that the council will then either move immediately to appoint a leader, in which case the position of deputy leader would fall because that's an executive member. But if the council doesn't, then for the period of 7 days when we have to reconvene another meeting, the deputy leader would take responsibility in the deputy leader capacity as opposed to an executive member capacity. So it's quite complicated. My preference is if a vote of no confidence in the leader is ever successful, that the committee then has a short adjournment and then we move immediately to the appointment of a leader, because I think that's clarity. It's a clear governance position for the council to be in, rather than be in kind of effective limbo for 7 days whilst we await another meeting.
But in a hung, if there's a hung administration, that might not necessarily be quite that straightforward. Councillor Lomas, did you want to add something?
I suppose I'm just trying to understand more than anything. So this is when you have a leader who has appointed an executive, including a deputy leader, then this applies. But obviously other clauses apply if you have not got a situation where you have a leader and an executive. So surely, I mean, that makes sense to me, that if you've got an executive, that they would act on an interim basis until you've got your other procedures in place.
And you're probably right. It was just, I didn't understand it. So it was a query that I you know, this is the one that I marked down as just saying, but what happens if the executive, the leader has gone, the deputy leader's not available? Which part of the executive then becomes the leader? Given that there might be 9 of them. Councillor Mason, I think you...
I was just going to say that about the difference between the deputy leader and the executive, but I think we've got there.
Yeah.
Bear in mind as well, there may be circumstances where the leader is unable to act, and that could be either through conflict or illness, for example, or is on holiday abroad and can't be contacted. During the pandemic, we had the same arrangements in place for when the chief operating officer was either very ill and not able to make decisions or could not be contacted for whatever reason. So there is also circumstance written into here that there are occasions where the leader may not be contactable or able to act, or is just simply away or on holiday or ill. So it does cover a myriad of circumstances. It's not just by removal of office.
Okay. Fantastic, thank you. So other than those typos, we're not proposing any changes than what's in Article 6. Yes, sorry, yes, you're absolutely right, Councillor Fisher, the tidying up of...
And the references to the appropriate appendices.
Yes, and yes. Sorry, there were loads of corrections, actually.
I just think, I mean, and I'm not saying that I'm younger than some people in the room, but most of the reading that I would do is basically via something like Wikipedia, right? Where what you do is you read it and go, I don't know what that word means, but it's highlighted in blue and takes me to the thing that explains that. And I think that's something we need to sort of just keep in the back of our minds, that we need to look at what the explanation is.
Can we do that? Can we put those where we say, please refer to or covered in, and then you just, you press a hyperlink.
We can certainly try that when it goes on the website, but it will be a PDF document on the website, and it will be every single section of the Constitution will be a separate entry on the website. So it's not all going to be one 800-page document as the current Constitution is. It's just one big thing when I look at it.
I just think
it will be a huge list of Article 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then Appendix 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you just
I just think you can put the hyperlinks in, and I just think if we want to make this a document that's vaguely accessible to anybody.
Yeah, I will ask, my technology skills are not that brilliant, but I will ask the people who may be able to do that. So I will certainly ask that.
Thank you.
Could I just ask colleagues, I'm struggling to hear at the best of times. So if there's lots of different conversations going on, it's incredibly distracting. Right, so we shall now move to, sorry, Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, just a quick question on what you've just said, Janie. You said it would be a PDF on the website. PDFs are notoriously not very accessible for people who use screen readers and other such tools to access documents. So can we just absolutely be clear that it's going to be fully accessible?
Yes, we're working with the website team because it's not actually accessible very well on the current website. It's incredibly difficult to find. So one of the actions that we're doing behind the scenes is working with the website team because it needs its own page and it needs to be linked with the meetings calendar, and it's currently not. So we're just looking at all of that behind the scenes as part of this wider process.
Oh, that's good. Excellent. So we move now to Article 9, which is the terms and references or terms and reference of this committee. Are there any comments in respect of that? Councillor Mason, Councillor Webb, sorry.
It's clever, that. I suppose firstly, if there's a little bit like we're marking our own homework here, but I think the one thing that I noticed there is, or at least I couldn't find a reference to, was independent members who,
Mark that down myself, mate.
yeah, see, got something right. Who obviously I know we have struggled to recruit independent members, but I think that they are so important for a group like this, for a committee like this. And I'd like to ask, in the previous version of this document, was the reference made to independent members? And I'm seeing heads being shaken. Therefore, is there and what do the committee think about including something about that here?
Well, Redmond has recommended.
So the Redmond review has recommended that appropriately qualified and skilled independent persons do join audit committees going forward. However, currently the local government legislation 1972 actually prohibits independent persons being on the committee where the finances of the council are debated and signed off. So it's currently contrary to legislation to have an independent person on the audit committee because the section 102 of the Local Government Act actually excludes that particular area of the Local Government Act gives indications as to the circumstances when independent persons could be appointed to a committee, and the Local Government Act 1972 actually excludes independent persons from committees where the finance of the council is debated. Now, that's why the Redmond review is wanting to rectify that through primary legislation and have suitably qualified independent persons join the committee.
Councillor Webb.
So why did we have them in the past? When I started on this committee, they existed. I think they're a good thing, and clearly the Redmond review thinks they're a good thing. So my question was, how do we do? Two questions. One, do we as a group think it's something we should aspire to? And two, can we write something in about it?
I also think they're good. I think independent persons have got a good, valid view to bring, supportive of the Redmond review recommendations. However, the current constitution is silent on independent persons being on audit committee. And currently I can't write something into the constitution which breaches primary legislation. So it would go against the Local Government Act 1972 to formally include something in here around an independent person. The only way you could get around that is if this committee then established a governance subcommittee, and the independent person would only sit on the governance subcommittee and would not sit on the audit committee that deals with the finances of the council. Now, we don't have a governance subcommittee because that would be the establishment of a governance subcommittee as part of this constitutional process. And I've not been instructed to provide for one, but it's a conversation that the chair's had with me.
Yeah, so I will come to you in a second, Councillor Lomas. Yes, I have had this conversation with the monitoring officer about how we can incorporate an independent member who, as you say, does add a great deal of value to our discussions. I absolutely acknowledge and accept the Local Government Act states that they cannot consider issues in relation to finance. However, they certainly can in respect of governance. One of the things that I've tried to do since being chair of this committee is try to split our meetings into being more focused on finance and then other meetings more focused on governance. It hasn't always worked because sometimes there are statutory dates that we have to hit. But I certainly felt that, and I don't see any reason why you could not say, yes, we can have an independent member that isn't a qualified accountant, but they don't participate on any matters that are finance related. Why would that not work? Or would it work?
Well, Chair, we can do that, but we'd have to be very specific around the governance functions and whether, and the most sensible solution of that is having a governance subcommittee, so that you have a meeting that is focused around governance related issues, and some of which we've highlighted here in the terms of reference. So most councils do have a separate subcommittee that deals with governance issues to make sure that there is true separation between finance and governance functions of the committee.
I don't know what we all think.
Quite
about that.
difficult.
Councillor-
It's quite difficult to sometimes separate out the finance functions from the governance functions. When you look at our work plan, we do seem to have a full range meeting most occasions.
Do. Councillor Lomas.
I am making an assumption, and hopefully you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that if we had such an arrangement with a governance subcommittee, the governance subcommittee would be the Audit and Governance Committee, but with the independent persons, and then we would have the Audit and Governance Committee without the independent persons that would look at the finance stuff. So that it would essentially be the practical reality that we would see would be that some of our meetings would be with an independent person looking at more governance and those issues. And then a couple of meetings per year, we would be looking at finance, and they would be without the independent persons. Is that what you're sort of saying might be a solution there?
That is an option. Yeah, that is an option. Some councils have an independent person on governance, have a completely separate entry in the meetings calendar. So there is an audit committee, and then there is the governance subcommittee. So it's two separate events in your diary, for example, and they could be the same week or separated by a month, for example, of whatever it is. So some committees do that. Some committees, as part of their governance, incorporate standards. So they would meet. So it would, for example, I'm not saying that this is written in any way, but our joint standards committee will become the governance committee. And so the governance committee, because the independent persons are on the standards committee, so all the governance functions relate to that, or you incorporate and amalgamate. So you have the audit, which is pure finance, and then you have a governance committee, which is combined standards and other governance arrangements. The only challenge is once a year, obviously, when we sign off the accounts, which is partly governance and partly accounts, and that's when the difficulties arise. And then that's where I would suggest that it's the finance meeting that needs to take precedent, because the annual governance statement is part of the accounts, and it's the accounts that members are challenged with and looking at signing off. So there's lots of different examples all around the country. We can look at that a bit more if the committee wishes.
I mean, I'm going to throw it out there to group. What do you think? Councillor Mason.
I think we should have independent members on. I think, but it's finding the mechanism that works. I don't want us to create something that doesn't work and it isn't natural, because like you said, there is a strong link between the two. But you know, personally, I think it was a really good asset having two different people on, bringing two different views.
Councillor Carr.
Yes, I agree. I think we should have independent persons who should be involved in the workings of the committee as often as there can be. I think the biggest issue will be finding the appropriate independent person or persons, but I agree with the principle.
Yeah, the only qualm I have is we already have expanded the scope of this committee. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we meet now about 11 times a year. I think there's may only be a month where this committee doesn't actually meet. It might be two, there might be two, sorry, Councillor Lomas.
Yep, to be fair, Chair, that has been because we have had additional work to do with the PIR action plan and the review of the Constitution, which are huge areas of work that are not likely, let's hope, not likely to be repeated every year. So, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm just looking at Janie's face when I suggested she might have to review the Constitution every year. you know, I think, yes, we have expanded the work we're doing this year, but I think for very good reasons that are unlikely to be repeated on a regular basis, let's say. So I think that, you know, we shouldn't use our experience right now as a, you know, indicator of the work that this committee will be doing every single year moving forward. And this is, by its very nature, something that will happen after the review of the Constitution is finished. So we'll have a bit of space, won't we?
Okay, Councillor Webb. Sorry, I will go to Councillor Webb. I will come back to you, Janie.
My only point was going to be, I think, you know, local government are going through the toughest times they've probably gone through in like forever because of budget cuts and things like that. And I think that's exactly part of the role that we fulfill is helping support that. So I think we are being stretched as a committee, but that's in part because of the need. And I just, yeah, back to the original point about whether we think an independent member should be on this committee. I think I've heard from several people that we think in principle that's a good idea. I don't think going through and arguing about it right now is probably the right thing to do. But I would possibly ask.
Well, the only problem we're not having a discussion about it now.
Yes, but we will have to have that discussion at some point. But whilst we don't have something to argue about in front of us, my suggestion was, sorry, Janie, but that some form of wording is put together that we could then discuss at an appropriate time. Otherwise, we're just going to go round and round for a long time.
Well, I actually think we've actually reached certain conclusions. I'm going to go to the monitoring officer and then I'll come straight to you, Councillor Fisher.
So I really want to be as optimistic as Councillor Lomas that the number and the volume of these meetings will decrease over time. But actually, if you kind of pin me to the spot, I really don't think so. I think, to be fair, that this committee is going to be required to meet more or less as frequently as it does now. So partly because of the action plan, local government association doesn't report back for 12 months from December. So there is going to be meetings when they want to come. And I echo the views of Councillor Webb, actually, that local government is changing so much. We've also got devolution. We are going to review the Constitution every 6 months. We're doing a fitness for purpose review every year. If you also look at paragraph 2.5 of the revised terms of reference, we're bringing in additional responsibilities in terms of the governance function as well, which have previously sat as classed as regulatory functions with licensing, but are actually governance functions. So, you know, some things around electoral activity, polling districts, etc. So we are actually generating more work for this committee rather than trying to put it on an even keel. I'm so sorry, Councillor Lomas. I wish I could be that optimistic, but I just think that perhaps not a meeting every month, but I think much more than, say, the 6 meetings that were occurring when I first joined the council. So I do think we're going to put a lot more business through this committee. And also we had quite a useful debate, I think, on the audit plan. And I think as the council changes, then members of this committee are probably going to be want to be closer to the audit plan and outcomes of audit recommendations. And sometimes it may not be possible to wait a couple of months, 3 months, for example. And I think the more the governance we put in through the Constitution as well, the more you might want to know about it. So we had the limited assurance for Make It York, as more proactive response from this committee. So I'm afraid I just can't be that optimistic. I'm sorry. Councillor Fisher.
I'm just going to say, I think we do want independent persons. I think they're absolutely critical. If the situation comes down as we review the Constitution, so I gather it's going to be a working document, it will be reviewed and updated, then there's no reason why we couldn't ask council to review the functions of audit and governance and indeed split it into 2 committees, 2 separate subcommittees. I don't see any problem with that. If the price of doing that is to get an independent person, I think it'd be well worth paying.
Surely we could put something in the Constitution that says, you know, the committee may appoint 2 independent persons to support the governance functions on the committee, but are not allowed to take part in whatever. And then actually how we make that happen operationally is a totally different issue.
I mean, that's how I'd want it to be framed, to say, yeah, we can have them. It will be made clear by the chair or by the monitoring officer or by the section 151. This is a finance issue, and therefore the independent member is excluded from those decisions. They don't have a vote anyway, so I think we could. I think, you know, personally, that would be the way I'd, as Councillor Mason suggested. That would be my recommendation for us to put forward to full council. There is another feature, and it is relevant under the current circumstances, in that we do have the current sheriff, and 1.3 does state that we are no longer able to
I was going to pick that up.
have the sheriff. Did you put that in?
No.
Was that your idea?
I must be the turkey voting for Christmas. You know, I mean, the sheriff is very rarely a councillor nowadays, and I can't see why there can't be a member of a non-political committee doing audit and governance work. I don't know what the rationale is, Jenny, if you want to explain why that was thought. I can understand it for the Lord Mayor, but not for the sheriff.
This is feedback that I received from members of your group.
Oh, your group stitched you
I mean, if
up.
they want to take me off it, there's easier ways to do it than changing the constitution.
Councillor Webb, sorry.
My only thought to that, and now I know the Lib Dem supporter, I'm not sure about it, but my only thought would be that, you know, the constitution is obviously first and foremost something that the Lord Mayor should have a handle on, and one would think that the sheriff would back up the Lord Mayor, and I suppose there's that, as audit and governance is in control of the constitution, one might suggest there might be a slight conflict of interest there. I'm not saying that there is, but that's my only thought.
I disagree and think it's totally, you know, I just can't see any logic behind it. But
well, I can see why no member of the executive, and that's in a different section anyway. I could see why you wouldn't necessarily want the Lord Mayor even proposed for it. I'm less inclined to see the logic of excluding the sheriff personally. And knowing that it's come from the Lib Dems, I'm even more inclined to
some emails tonight, isn't it?
To question it. But Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I have to say I was curious about this as well. I think that the sheriff is, in my understanding, and again, I might be wrong, but in my understanding, the sheriff is even more of a ceremonial only role than the Lord Mayor is, because the Lord Mayor chairs full council, and so it's absolutely right that the Lord Mayor should not be part of audit and governance, because you can't, you know, audit and govern yourself, or you shouldn't. I suppose for me, the only thing is, what do people looking in think? And I guess that would be the test I would want to apply is, would it look like to members of the public that the sheriff did have more influence than they do? And that this is absolutely no offence to you, Councillor Mason, that, you know, because they wear the fancy get up and the chains and everything, does it then look like there is more of a sort of a technical role for them in the Civic Party rather than a ceremonial role for them? So that was my only question, and I don't have an answer to it. And I think that's probably something we do need to think about, is sometimes it's not just about what it is, but it's the way it's viewed.
No, I mean, I do see that, but I take that ceremonial element of the role of sheriff and say to myself, well, the reality, I'll come to you in a second, Councillor Mason, but the reality of it is we are an apolitical group. That is its, that's in its DNA. And I personally don't see the issue with the sheriff, but Councillor Mason and then Councillor Webb.
I think you either make a decision of the sheriff can't sit on any committee, because there's always, it doesn't matter if you're on licensing, on planning, or whatever you're on, there's always going to be potentially someone thinking there's, if that's the view we're taking, that it's nothing to do with actually anything structural, it's actually a perception, then it's going to be everything. It can't be one thing or nothing.
Yeah, Councillor Webb, then Councillor Lomas, then I'm going to put it to a vote.
Oh, way, that's serious now. No, I think I would disagree with your final point there, Councillor Mason, in that because of the nature of audit and governance, literally being in charge of governance or monitoring governance, and the Lord Mayor and their party, in theory, being no, not the political party, your party, the Civic people, the ones who are tight. That I think that is actually sort of what the problem is. And I thought Councillor Lomas put it best, much better words than I'm managing. It comes down to the Nolan principles again, doesn't it? It's is there a perception that there could be any difference? And yeah, I'm still slightly undecided myself, but I think that's where that point comes from. And I would wonder if Janie might be able to elaborate a little bit more about the reasoning that the group gave, if that's allowed.
Well, I'll come to Councillor Lomas first, then I'll give the monitoring officer the final word, if you like, and then I'm going to put it to a vote of the committee.
Yeah, just to respond to Councillor Mason's point, I do think audit and governance is different to other committees, and that there is a reason why members of the executive aren't allowed to be part of audit and governance. There is a reason why the Lord Mayor isn't allowed to be part of audit and governance. And like I say, because I think we are in a privileged position because we have that deeper understanding of the nature of the Civic Party. And for me, it is more about perception. And certainly for myself, before I was elected as a councillor, before I started learning more during my process of deciding to stand for election, I would have viewed the person who wore any kind of chains or whatever, I'm not going to mention tights because we're all going to be wearing tights to our next meeting to keep us warm. But the person who formed part of that Civic Party, I would imbue them with more power and influence than I now know them to have. And as I say, I am in a privileged position of having that deeper understanding, but I put myself back a few years when I didn't, still don't understand a lot of it. But absolutely.
Right, I'm going to give you final word and then we will put it to a vote.
The Audit and Governance Committee is absolutely different. It is a non-political committee which is minded to be assured about all areas of functioning of the council. The Civic Office, which is the Lord Mayor and the Sheriff, there is a public perception, whether that's agreed or not by members of this committee or anybody else who's watching this meeting, there is a perception that the Civic Office are held in different regard. They are seen as primary citizens of the city, as ambassadors of the city in their roles, and it's seen as I hate to say this, but a privilege to represent the city on an ambassadorial civic ceremonial role. And I'm just replicating the views of members here, so hence the word sheriff is included in 1.3. However, you do have to pay very due regard to the public perception. This is a public document. So this is a public document designed and written to advise the committee around our principles and around public expectation. And The Civic office in York is one of the most senior in the country. We have the second most senior Lord Mayor appointment in the country, and it comes with the office, and Mr. Watson has already indicated the history around the Civic roles. So you do have to pay some regard to the public perception. It'd be quite difficult to separate if you were asked why the Lord Mayor and not the sheriff, or the opposite way around. So
Okay,
how do you separate the two?
I'm persuaded.
So if you can
just a
provide me with an answer
Final
for that.
question.
Mm.
It's a question, not a point. When we went back to the executive section, did it say the sheriff can't be a member of the executive?
I can put that in.
Well, you've got to have it one way or the other, haven't you? I mean, it's either.
The way of addressing it is in back to Article 5, is we put an absolute categoric sentence in Article 5 around the Lord Mayor and the Sheriff, and being they cannot be members of any committee, or they can be members of. So we can put a clarity sentence in Article 5.
I think we're going to have. I think we're going to have to. Right. Are we keeping this 1.3 as written, excluding the sheriff from being a member of the Audit and Governance Committee? All those in favour of continuing it as it's written here? You can vote. No, I'm going to let him. He's a member of the committee. You can certainly vote. All those in.
Sorry, Chair. He is a member of the committee, absolutely, who has declared a specific interest in this item.
Yeah, you have. I'm sorry, Councillor Mason. That's absolutely correct. Yeah, you did declare it right at the beginning. I forgot that. So all those apart from Councillor Mason that are in favour of keeping 1.3 as written, please raise. I was persuaded by the argument. All those against? 1. Right, the other sections, well, it hasn't been approved yet by full council. So the other areas that Janie referred to in 2.5, which is the increase in the powers of this committee to take into its remit areas that were formerly held within licensing around the elections. Do we agree that those are appropriate to be retained by to come under the ambit of A&G? Yes, great.
Just for clarity, these are currently listed as regulatory functions for licensing committee. My professional opinion is that's the wrong committee that should be considering these. These are governance functions, not regulatory.
Councillor Fisher. Mike.
The reason I asked the question on page 92, under governance functions, E, where it says make payments, that's the other. Because as far as I'm aware, we've never been asked to make a payment. They just sort of happen. No. Do we have to ratify them? Are we? We don't have a budget for them.
No, it's important to keep the ability there in case you have to. So I've, in looking at this, I've tried to be as all-encompassing as possible. So if the scenario arose, for example, where Lorraine has indicated earlier at the annual complaints report, where there are some maladministration payments and they're quite low level. However, if that was a significant one, so for example, the ICO fines for breaches can be like millions. I think the cap is off actually, I think from memory. So I've tried to build in scope where I don't need full council's permission to amend the constitution to allow a function that needs to be made to occur. So we've tried to be as inclusive as possible. So I'm hopeful circumstances like this are incredibly rare, if ever.
Thank you. It's 20 million euros is the cap for an ICO breach.
Right, I've got one, and I think this is Debbie. I think H, monitoring, on page 92, 2.4 H. Monitoring the council's expenditure against budget. Is that new? Is it what we do at the moment? And if not, how is it going to get incorporated into our work? So it's the monitoring the council's expenditure against budget. Now, we look at the Treasury outturn, and we look at the midterm review, but we do not currently monitor the council's expenditure against its budget. Why did you put that in?
I don't think I did put that in.
But I forgot to take it.
Yes.
Oh,
So I put it in and asked Debbie, is this
Mike.
So I put it in and asked Debbie, is this right? And I've forgotten to take it out because no, it's not correct.
Right. So, Councillor Webb.
So who does monitor it?
Executive and Scrutiny Committee.
That's what I thought. We were right.
So remove H and move everything else up one. Well, I, J and K up one. Nice, it's good job I picked that up.
Amazing.
You'd think, wouldn't you? Right. If there's no other, I have no idea what we agreed and what we didn't. We're keeping 1.3 in. We're moving H. Is that all we've agreed?
Yes, and looking at options around the independent person.
Oh, the independent. Yeah, I knew there was something else. The independent person. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Councillor Fisher.
There has been a convention on this council that the chair of Audit and Governance is always a member of an opposition party. It's not specifically written into the executive. Sorry, I'm a bit hoarse. There's always been a convention on this council that the chair of the Audit and Governance Committee is a member of an opposition party. I just wonder if that is a convention or whether it needs to be written in the Constitution.
As far as I'm aware, it's a convention and sits alongside the appointment of other committee chairs who are very often opposition party members. So I haven't written it in. I've just indicated that the factual position that the chair and vice chair are appointed by full council. So I would imagine that that's a discussion at annual council and the leading up to annual council about appointment of chairs and vice chairs.
That's an interesting one. I mean, because that has been a long-standing convention.
It has been a very long time. Chris Stewart, for example.
Councillor Webb.
I think if it's been such a long-standing convention, and actually I do think there is benefit to certain committees having opposition chairs, because I think it's those checks and balances, isn't it, really, which is quite important. And just to be clear, all chairs of committees are appointed by it's in the leader's gift, isn't it? Is that correct? I'll ask that again. I'll ask that again, just so I can get some clarification. So appointment of chairs to committees is proportional, but it's within the leader's gift, and that's to all committees, really. So even if we vote on it at full council, technically it's the leader who's making that decision. Is that correct?
Sorry, that is correct. And that was the point of clarification that the monitoring officer was just giving me, that whoever the leader of the council, whichever group is in administration, it is for them to determine how the committees and committee chairs are divided. So it's one of those, be careful what you wish for in opposition that you may not want if you were in power. Sorry, was Councillor Mason?
That's just the politics, they're not the person, isn't it? You know, so they would say, we've got, I don't know, 10 chairs to give out, you can have those ones, you can have those, you can have those. So we couldn't write anything in that would override that.
No, and that's what we would in effect be doing if we said that the chair of Audit and Governance had to be a member of the opposition, of an opposition party. So I think we'll keep that as it is. Councillor Webb.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, because we have got the proportionality rule, which is probably far more important, but technically if one group of councillors was so overwhelmingly in control, then that would not it would negate proportionality, wouldn't it? So yeah, leave it as is. I think.
Yeah, leave it as is. Thank you. Right, so we're going to move to Article 11, which is Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee. Any thoughts on staffing matters and urgency? Well, I've got one on 3.6. In respect of staffing conditions, the Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee will have the following decision-making functions. And then we've got, in respect of chief officers only, A, B and C. But in respect of non-chief officers, we've got to note redundancy, retirement and settlement agreements. And given where we've just been, why is that not in respect of chief officers?
It is. So it is all encompassed in all of this, which is exercise of all the discretions in A, B and C.
Right.
It's just a lot more detailed.
Right.
Because of the provisions for chief officers, whereas non-chief officers, it's operational decisions and members don't have a role. So it's just a note.
It's just a note. Right.
Yes.
Okay. Right. That's fine. Yeah. Great. Councillor Webb.
Thanks, Chair. It's on that same 3.6 actually, as for the A, the B and the C. Do we want to put something in there about how these matters are then reported to the council in general? I was just thinking, I mean, staffing matters and urgency make the decisions, but then I don't know, for something as large as and important as that, and I think this happens anyway, but do we want to put something specific in there that says how this is reported more widely?
So the exit strategy document that you considered on the last occasion indicates that internal audit do an annual report to this committee. This committee does an annual report to full council.
This is what I was thinking, and do we need to just state that here?
So this is probably going to have to retain under review because the government is reconsidering the £95,000 pay cap for some officers who've got a very long service who want to depart the council. So probably over the next few months, I'm going to have to revise this with Debbie and internal audit. Also, following on from the exit strategy document, Appendix 1 will also include more details around pay discretions, because that's going to be the key, because that is the scheme of delegation section of who does what and when and why. But any details coming to this committee will, I propose, be incorporated into an annual report to full council. So that will be done. So when we start looking at the new governance framework, internal audit will do a report. This committee will report in its annual report the information that's received and the issues that it's adjudicated on. But that's at the moment my intention. But this section is probably going to be reviewed because the government is revisiting the £95,000 pay cap. It was postponed and now there's discussion that it's being sort of reinvigorated for discussion. So we're just waiting for some updated information.
Hyperlinks.
Thanks. The reason that I wanted this committee to consider this article was because I felt that its composition was an issue that I would have liked us to consider. It said the Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee is a committee of full council and shall be proportionate in its composition. I'm not sure that it is currently. Even though there has been a change within one of the political parties, it's still proportionate. That's interesting. Councillor Fisher's raised his hand.
It's the same point. How can you be proportional when you've only got 4 members?
Well, no, you've only got 3 members.
Four.
Haven't, oh, yes, how can that committee, yes, I thought you were talking about the Greens.
His annual council currently only allocates 4 seats to it, so it's on the percentages, and currently it is the percentages to fill the 4 seats. If annual council was going to say, okay, instead of 4, it's going to be 9 or 7, all of the percentages change because of the allocation of seats. So it's quite a really complicated kind of chart that you have to look at and do some sums, but it's currently annual council allocates 4 seats to staffing matters, and it's the allocation, it's such a small number, that's how the percentages work out.
Okay, fair enough. Councillor Lomas.
So just to make sure I've understood, proportionate means proportionate to the groups on the council, not proportionate to the administration versus other groups.
It's the groups on the council, and the percentage of the number of members that you've got for each group equals the percentage allocation that you receive of the seats.
So the current situation that we've got is that you have the administration having a majority on that committee, regardless of whether that's proportionate to the overall.
So how the calculations work out, that that is correct. It's the percentage allocation works out based on 4 seats, that it goes to the 4 to the groups with the highest percentage, and that is how it's worked out at this moment in time. And that's it's the same proportionate calculation for SMU that's been used on previous occasions. But if full council was to say more councillors sit on SMU, then the calculations would change, because you're introducing more seats to be taken up by City of York councillors. So currently, I can't remember, it's just over 100 seats that are available, but if we had 150 seats available, the calculations change and more members are required to sit on more committees. So it's the overall seats that we've got available.
Councillor Ware.
I was going to ask this point on an earlier item regarding proportionality, because I know it has been a concern recently, because there was committees that have not been proportional. And I was wondering if within this document somewhere, or preferably somewhere on the website, there was, a link to just an Excel spreadsheet with the formulas typed in, so you could actually just fill in the numbers and put that on. So it's very open to the public. It's there. We could put a hyperlink to it when it's relevant. Is that something that seems reasonable and sensible?
It's something that we can include on the website. I wouldn't suggest including it in the Constitution per se, but it's a separate document outside of the Constitution. So it's part of the bigger suite of governance toolkit, if you like, but it's not something that you would ever incorporate into the Constitution. It's a separate document, and it actually supports annual council.
Yeah, it's kind of like a working document that sits behind it. And the problem with the proportionalities, I know people get very excited about it, but when it's 4 seats, you're not putting on fingers and toes of people, are you? So there's an element of rounding, and the smaller the numbers are, the bigger the rounding, which is why it doesn't appear to be proportionate at this point.
Given what I've seen of York Council of the last few years, the numbers are relatively tight, and I think it is going to be an issue, and it is an issue. It's a live issue right now. So I think being open and transparent about that is really important.
Fine. So are we happy with this as it is? Were there any amendments apart from adding that proportion? Oh, sorry, I missed you again.
Don't say it like that. And I think this is covered, but I just want clarification. Throughout, obviously, a lot of the talk about staffing issues and things like that, there's no mention of sort of outside bodies and trade unions and things like that. And I was just wanting clarification as to where that fits in. Is that within the wider remit of staffing matters and urgency, or how does that play a part?
So there is a whole raft of other HR procedures and governance frameworks which happen outside of staffing matters. So there is heavy consultation with trade unions throughout, both on a departmental level that Debbie and I are involved in, and also a corporate level, which again Debbie and I are involved in. They don't necessarily sit in the Constitution. We've made reference to it here with the Corporate Consultation Negotiation Committee. That is the overarching body that looks at things like pay discussions, monitoring workforce demographics, monitoring job evaluation compliance, etc. So we've made the reference there, but there is a huge HR network that sits behind that particular one sentence. Yeah, and the trade unions be consulted on this as well, by the way, on this particular article, because obviously it's relevant for them. The trade unions meet regularly with me as well, and so they put input into, they're currently working with us, just to keep referencing Appendix 1. The trade unions are currently working with us behind the scenes in a completely separate working group, looking at implications from the exit strategy document. They were consulted on that, and also now looking at the working provisions around delivering against that. So it's around discretions, who does what and when, etc. So we're looking at that behind the scenes as in like a separate work stream, if you like.
Okey-dokey. So are we happy to accept Article 11, which then moves us finally on to, and I'm going to give this half an hour, if that's all right, no more than half an hour. Hopefully we'll finish it quicker than that. Okay. Look, if members need to have a comfort break or need to leave, that's absolutely fine. If we haven't got time, I mean, if members feel that we've covered 4 articles and they are they want to call it a day, I'm more than happy with calling it a day. Should we call it a day? I think so. I'm tired too. I had a long meeting.
I think we've done.
Yeah.
So just for clarity, when you read this, it is a lot longer than is currently at section 4(4)(d) of the current constitution. In my professional opinion, section 4(d) of the current constitution is slightly too high level. And there is no reference to the JNC handbook for the chief executive, which is also the handbook for statutory officers. And alongside that, there is a JNC handbook for chief officers. What we've made a conscious decision of doing, just to help with background of when you read this outside of this meeting, is that wherever possible, we've stuck as close as we possibly can to the JNC national guidance. So we do follow that as the joint negotiating committees, consultative committee. So it's the national guidance around chief officer appointments, and members are involved in the appointment and disciplinary of chief officers only. This is only assistant directors, directors and corporate directors and the chief operating officer in this council. So members are not involved in the appointment or disciplinary, say for appeals, with grades, the lower grades up to grade 13. This is very wordy for specific reasons as well, because there's also a lot of regulations around dismissal and disciplinary and the responsibilities. We've also included in here, for clarity and again for openness, issues around the appointment and the disciplinary of the Director of Public Health, which is a completely separate regime involving the Secretary of State. So we've tried to be as open as possible, a lot more transparent as possible, and a lot more detailed as possible. And that's why this is probably about 4 times longer than the current content of the Constitution around appointment issues. We've also looked more at process to be followed. So hopefully that helps you where of the information has come from. It's the JNC handbook is available on the website if you wanted to look at it.
Okie dokie. Yeah, let's call it a day. Councillor Mason.
Before we do.
Yeah, I'm going to get to it.
Before we do, how do we shape, so also there's all the back office things going on in terms of looking at the Constitution and groups feeding in. If we have ideas of things that are new, where does that kind of go into that process?
So it comes into this process, and we're going to review the Constitution once it's in place every 6 months with this committee, and we do an annual fitness for purpose test every year, which means every year there will be 1 meeting allocated to a review of the Constitution to ensure that it's as up to date as possible, that all members bring their learning and their experiences from other meetings. Myself and Debbie do from our attendance at other meetings and committees. And we try and we also take into account legislation, technical changes, financial changes, etc. So it will be an ongoing conversation. So hopefully this is the start of how we will never have to do this in depth so much ever again, but we will be openly encouraging conversation at our annual Fitness for Purpose meeting, and hopefully there's a two-way dialogue in terms of ensuring that this document is fit for purpose.
So what I want to do, Councillor Mason, is I want to have the work that this committee has done and the recommendations that we've made, the work that the cross-party working group does and the recommendations it makes, incorporated onto the website as a work in progress, so that either other members that aren't on either of those two committees can see what's been done, and also members of the public have the opportunity to feed in to the process. So the next meeting is on the 16th of November. And we've moved a number of items out of there so that we can give this a good run, but we will be looking at key corporate risk 12 as the only other agenda item that day. And I'm not proposing to go through the rest of the work plan in detail. Thank you very much. There are no other issues of urgent business. Therefore, oh, Councillor Lomas. Yeah, we've just done it. Yeah, that was it. I've just looked at November's. We'll look at it in more detail. No.
I still have things to go through, but
did you?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought I'd said basically that's it will be. Anyway, the meetings. We are still. Sorry, before we all start talking, we are actually still live. So if there were additional points, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh,
I
okay.
absolutely
I'll go quickly. So if we wanted to introduce a new committee, it can't be done during this process because this is a review. It would have to take place at a Fitness for Purpose.
If you wanted to introduce a new committee, you can absolutely put the suggestions forward now, and we would create a terms of reference and we'd have to look at the purpose, the function, how it fits into the meeting calendar, and obviously things like how many seats should it have, etc. Ultimately, any recommendations that you make is the decision of full council. So ultimately, any proposals that you put forward, such as creation of a new committee or areas where there is dispute, will all be reported to full council for full council to determine of what goes in the final version.
I'm really sorry, Councillor Mason. You did bring this up with me earlier, and I completely slipped my mind.
That's fine. I can take that up by email then.
It's been a long day.
And the second one was just the Constitution online it says 2016 on it. So I just wondered if we could update that to the most recent version.
So the current Constitution, the version I've got was updated from, well, the cross-party working group members have indicated that some of it was pre-2016, some of it was 2018. Yeah. So the current Constitution is remaining as is. And with working then, we'll have version control and dates on the new Constitution when it's finalised.
So that is because even though we agreed some things that, for example, the sheriff page online doesn't mention deputy, that's still watermark 2016, but that is a change, isn't it? I mean,
so the deputy sheriff issue is a bit that wasn't resolved at October 2020 because they put the matter back to Audit and Governance Committee as part of the Constitution review, and we've been dealing with that today.
Okay. I'm just concerned that isn't the most up-to-date version online. That was my only concern.
No. Okay. Thank you. If there are any other points, I will now call this meeting to order, and we shall see you again on the 20th, whatever date it was in November. I've forgotten already. 16. All right. Take care.